Women voters are again at the center of gravity for Indian polls. So claims State Bank of India research in a report that talks about the growing relevance and importance of women voters, especially in the current Lok Sabha election. Data that SBI says has emanated from the first 4 phases of the election reveals that 45.1 crore voters, representing almost 67% of the turnout, shows, according to the SBI report, 2.5 crore more voters having exercised their franchise as compared to 2019. And this, according to the State Bank of India, is also on account of women-centric schemes that have unleashed a multiverse of benefits and have ensured vocal women participation in these elections. And joining me to tell us more about these findings and what they really mean are 2 guests, Dr. Soumya Kanti Ghosh, the Group Chief Economic Advisor at the State Bank of India, India's largest banking institution. We are also joined by one of India's most well-known psephologists, Yashwant Deshmukh, Director at C Voter. Dr. Ghosh, coming straight to you. The headline of your latest report says women voters are again at the center of gravity for Indian politics. Explain to our viewers, what do you mean by this, and how have you concluded Nari Shakti is a key player in the current Lok Sabha election?
Yeah, thank you, Siddharth, for having me on the show. Just let me explain to you. I think there are a couple of aspects to the study, and this is actually based on the actual data we have collected from the Election Commission website. So the Election Commission not only gives out the turnout data, but it is also giving out in phases the registered electorates and the turnout. So using that data and also the official press release of the Election Commission, which came out a couple of days back, said that 45.1 crores people have voted. So if you compare this absolute number with the last 2019 first 4 phases, this is an increase of around 2.5 crores of voters. So these numbers being provisional, but this is mostly, I think, final, given that it's the Election Commission figures. Now, at State Bank of India, we had data where we analyzed the 1.9 crore of these 2.5 crores, because this data is getting revised by the Election Commission on a continuous basis. Now, out of this 1.9 crore, as you correctly said, the total number of women voters are actually more than 95 lakhs, and the men voters are less than 90 lakhs. So if we apply the same proportion to the overall 2.5 crore increase for which we are collecting the data, the ratio is that for every 100 men voters, there are 110 women voters who are actually voting. And the most important point to note is that we have also done the analysis out of 373 constituencies. We found out that whether the participation of the women are increasing or declining. Out of this 373 of 381 which went to the polls, we found that there has been increased participation of women in 270 constituencies, and the overall turnout in the first 4 phases was 66.95%. It was 67.15% in 2019. So it's almost at par. And if we see today's numbers also, they have also been quite healthy. And if you look at the last time also, there was a dip in 5th phase, 64.2. So even if this number is around 64 to 65% today, I think it will be at least comparable with what happened in 2019. And finally, the most important point to note that out of all these constituencies which have went to vote, I think there are, by definition, there has been status quo or increase in voting in at least 90% of the overall constituencies. And there is a term which we have used which says that what is the increase in the absolute level of turnout. We found that in absolute terms, there is a 6% jump in voting in the first 4 phases compared with the last 4 phases. Obviously, there will be always be an increase in the absolute voters, but if we look into the history of Indian voting from 1952 till 2014, I think this absolute voter has had more meaning from 2014 onwards, when a staggering 14 crore people had voted for the had voted more than was compared in 2019. So from that point of view, 2004 or 14 onwards, we have witnessed an structural break in the Indian election in terms of the number of people voting up. So just to conclude, as of now, again there are women voters who are turning up in large numbers, and possibly this trend has been continuing in the last couple of phases, and this is getting more pronounced as we are moving towards the end of the election.
Viewers, I'll emphasize one point that Soumya Kanti Ghosh makes, and this is from the report, which says the net incremental share of women voters comes to 93.6 lakh, way above the 84.7 lakh increase in their male counterpart participation, hinting at the cementing of women as the new center of gravity for Indian politics. 270 constituencies, this is a point that Dr. Ghosh just made, out of 373 have witnessed increased participation of 1.2 crore women. Now, just for the sake of clarity once more, Dr. Ghosh, to those who might ask you, how did you determine and make these conclusions with regard to higher Nari Shakti participation? Your report also says gender-wise voter turnout for 373 constituencies has been released. Just expand on that point before I go to Yashwant for his opening comments.
Yeah, actually, Siddharth, if you look into what we have done is that these are all actual data. So what happens is that the election commission, there is an gives out the turnout data, and there is basically an app, as all of you know. That app actually updates the turnout data, and we also have the total number of electorates as per the state the election commissions, and also as per the election commission data, which gets sometimes revised or added later. So that's why the first two, that's why analysis on 1.9 crore, because the 2.5 crore analysis data may be released later on. But our sense is that just looking into the actual numbers of all the four phases, the number of registered women voters, registered men voters, the ratio of women participation for each constituency which the election commission has released, the ratio of men participation, you will actually find that how many women have voted for every constituency out of all which is going to poll this time. So that gives a clear indication of where the voting is happening across states, across constituencies, and also it gives you, there is a certain percentage of seats which are reserved for the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes. You will find that there has been pronounced voting in the first three phases for the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes. In the fourth phase onwards, there has also been an increased women participation from the general seats. So the trend is actually overwhelming across all seats in terms of every parliamentary constituency in terms of the total change. So this is basically something we wanted to see, because there has been a lot of discussion of the turnout. So we wanted to see how the numbers are also panning up in terms of absolute voters. And there you see that there is indeed an increase in the women participation across the board.
Dr. Ghosh, one more quick point. You say that voting patterns based on turnout could be misleading, and you have estimated these based on absolute number of voters. Why do you rely on this formulation?
See, that's a good question. I think if you look into our data from 1952 onwards, where we have given the total voter turnout, and if you until 2024, you will find that generally, roughly, there has been an increase in the voter turnout in every election. There has been some, I think in 1991, 92, there was a decline in the overall absolute number. If you look at the table. So my sense is that if the number of electoral voters are increasing, and if you always base your numbers based on a certain turnout, and if you know that for example in Nagaland there was a 25 decline in turnout because of some calls for a boycott, sometimes that may not give you a complete picture. So it's better to look at the number of the absolute number of voters. Obviously the absolute number of voters will increase, but the way the voting is happening in terms of a number, which give you a clear idea of how the voting is taking place across the different genders. So that's the reason why we looked into the absolute number of votes also. But as of now, just to conclude, as of now, the turnout ratio of first four phases average is 66.95. which is almost equivalent to 67.15 for the first 4 phases of last election.
Yashwant, now coming to you, before I get into some of the specifics, putting the same question to you. Do you agree with the kind of methodology that has been used by SBI? Because SBI also says that while voter turnout ratio is widely accepted measure of participation in an election, this is not the most accurate method. While comparing voter turnout ratio across phases of elections, this measure may paint a misleading picture. Hence, SBI, as Dr. Ghosh has explained, tried to find out how many more people have cast their votes in the 4 phases that have concluded vis-a-vis the same constituency in 2019. Do you agree with this method?
Well, first of all, I mean, I'm happy somebody did that, because there are always both shades of the truth. You know, there is a one way of looking into the percentage which has its own merit because of the decadal change in the population, and also we should keep in mind that every 5-year cycle between election there is a 7 to 8% of new voter coming in, about 2 to 3% old voters phasing out. So if you look into that, there is almost like 10% of the electorate which is fresh in every election cycle. So obviously that number in absolute number would be higher because the population goes up, number of electorate goes up. So it's not about being right or wrong. It's about the way one analyzes and looks into the merits and demerits. What I find interesting in his analysis, is the differential turnout between men and male and females, you know, and that is a very interesting part to understand, Siddharth, because as we all know that, you know, in population, it's never 50-50. First of all, it is 50 to 48. And when it comes to the registration of the voters, for almost like first 3 or 4 decades, the gap between male and the female registration always was in the double-digit figures, first of all. Second, for the first 5 to 6 decades, then the turnout factor between the male turnout and female turnout was, almost more than 10%, the gap between. Correct. So, when you take that double whammy, lesser number of registration for the females, then lesser number of turnout, then we are looking at the first 50 years of our electoral democracy as a thing where the cumulative impact of that thing was almost about 25%. As if that you took half the population with 25% less impact in the election outcome. That was the situation in the first 5 decades. In a 100-meter race, like you are putting a male runner at starting block at 25 meter. It was that kind of situation. But in the last 10 to 15 years, things have started changing. First of all, the registration numbers went up big time among the female voters. That was very, very encouraging sign. Of course, that has a lot to do with the fact that ever since the voter I cards came in, voter I cards became the principal thing initially for the Labharti Yojanas. Till the point in time Aadhaar happened, and then slow and steadily Aadhaar took over as the default identity card in India. Before that it used to be voter ID card. So obviously that registration helped. But the good point was, as the registration increased, the turnout increased as well. And now in the last 10 years, we are looking at a situation where in big number of seats, the female turnout is actually surpassing the male turnout. So it was very heartening to see in terms of absolute numbers, because sometimes...
let's also bring up the chart. I'll request my producers, Yashwant, you continue your point, to bring up the chart which shows additional women voter participation by number of constituencies. That's a very interesting chart from the SBI research report, and you will be able to better expand on that point. Yashwant, please continue.
Sure. From Mr. Ghosh analysis, another thing that interesting and useful that I figured out as a researcher is that, percentage comparison in terms of number of seats sometimes goes awkward when there is a delimitation that has happened. Like, for example, in 2008, we went through a massive delimitation exercise, So the boundaries change. So obviously when the boundaries change, the number of the composition and the male and female, everything goes for a toss. So at the end of the day, it is useful to look into the absolute numbers as well. Ideally, we should be looking at both of them and to figure out what could be the good, bad and ugly part of the turnout. By and large, in our trackers, Siddharth, we always ask it's a standard practice to ask, how likely you are and why don't people go out and vote and like that. And it's a global question, a standard question of asking on a 0 to 10 scale how likely you are. And our estimation was that the worst case scenario was about 62% turnout, and the best case scenario was 78% turnout. And the midway in that way, that those who were confirmed to vote more or less were almost about 66%. In our pre-poll, the thing that we do for the Mood of the Nation for India Today group. Yes. So our estimation was about 66.4% as the turnout factor. And it's pretty much going in the same direction. I mean, obviously the surveys have a margin of error, but it's pretty much going in the same direction. However, the interesting point was that the intent to vote thing was almost at par. In the confirm vote, if it was 55 for males, it was 53 for females. So it was almost at par about the lowest possible voter turnout. That no matter what, even if there is a natural calamity, I will go out and vote. They were like 55 for male and 53 for females. So that confirmation that females are going to go out and vote, that adds up, Siddharth, with the larger theme of these elections now, which I kind of sometimes object to the name of the Labharti thing, because I believe instead of Labharti, they should be thematically called as the governance theme. Because males tend to vote on everything that is emotional, non-rational, caste, religion, polarization and everything. But our research has consistently confirmed that females are the most rational voters of India. The voters who actually vote not just on the governance, but delivery of governance. And that makes half of the population of India the one which is not very emotional in that way at the time of voting, to getting.
That's an interesting point, because let's go back to that additional women voter participation chart that we were just showing, Dr. Ghosh, because you used, along with that chart, you say that there are 3 women-centric schemes which are clearly ensuring more women participation: Ujjwala Yojana, Matru Vandana Yojana, PM Awas Yojana. Yashwant makes this interesting point about the emotional versus rational voting preferences between men and women. Explain this to us. Are you therefore saying that women-centric schemes are leading to more women participation, and is that different from what Yashwant is saying?
No, I think what Jaswant said, I agree with that. I think in terms of the emotional and rationality, because for example, we examine those programs which are having a financial impact, that could be a qualitative impact or it could be a quantitative impact. Qualitative means in terms of the connect, and the quantitative means in terms of the financial benefits. So in terms of the technical analysis, economic analysis which we did, we found out, for example, that the correlation coefficient of having a Prime Minister Awas Yojana in a state and that of the women's participation, the ratio is as high as 0.37. So that's not a small number. And the other 2 schemes which clearly has a very concerting impact is a Matru Vandana Yojana, which is basically the 6,000 rupees, and the Ujjwala Yojana. So the point which I'm trying to note is, is that these schemes which are given to this woman actually ensures, apart from the overall benefit which the women get over the long term, because remember that this Awas is an asset creation on the part of the women households, and that is in their name. So it's also going to have a long-term impact. So obviously it's going to have a long-term impact over a point of time that would also establish an emotional connect, or whatever you can call it, with the voters for a longer period of time. So that's the bottom line of what we wanted to say.
Yashwant, continue with that point, because the data also shows that PMAY, for example, having mild impact on additional female voter turnout in the election. The SBI has given a very detailed chart on incremental female voters and the broad data that we already have seen. Therefore, do you think, continuing with the point that you made, that the rational choice being made by women voters is centered around their welfare and the welfare of their household that they manage?
Absolutely. I mean, and just to add to Mr. Ghosh's point that, it is not just limited to the schemes done by central government. I mean, we have seen more than enough that all the state governments and state leaders have also come up with their own women-centric schemes, big-time schemes, and we have seen their impact in the assembly elections as well. And those schemes have been continuing. So what I'm trying to say is that females being a rational, governance-oriented voter is something which has been realized by regional as well as national parties and those who are ruling at the state as well as the ruling at the center. And that is something which, rather than just a Labharti or something, Labharti has a sense, Siddharth, as if you have put on some carrot for people to come out and vote. I won't say that. I mean, these are the schemes which are very much related to the governance. Welfareism is fine, but it is something which is not just females. It's just it's a thing which impacts at the household level, which at the larger level for the children, even for the males. But the schemes which are appreciated more by the females, they know this is what is going to impact the quality of life for me, my kids, my family, my future of my kids. So they are very, very rational in looking around those schemes, and they are taking a decision in probably, they might vote right or left or center. That's a different thing. But the thing is that they are looking at those schemes in our trackers continuously. Whenever we ask them, the issues that they point out, the important issues have more to do with the issues which are impacting their economic sense, welfare sense of their household and their family. Unlike the male, where big number of voters do mention casteism, do mention polarization, do mention other emotive issues which come around, not just during the election, but otherwise as well. But overall speaking, these are the things which is making the female think where to vote, and most importantly, they are coming out and voting. That is
there's one more chart. There's one more chart which I want you to reflect on. But for explaining that, Dr. Ghosh, you say that absolute number of voters have increased in reserved constituencies, and you say that those at the bottom of the pyramid are voting decisively. Category-wise change in absolute voters in 2024, you call this a welcome and encouraging trend that is visible in your analysis. Explain that for our viewers.
Yeah, actually, if you look into our tables, I think those seats where the seats are reserved for the scheduled tribes, there is the maximum increase in the percentage of voting on the women, and also in the scheduled caste, the seats which are reserved, that the percentage change is just follows the scheduled tribes. Since the number of general seats are higher, obviously the number of female voters will be higher than the male. Maybe the proportion may be higher, but what is encouraging is that in the first three phases, whereby a large part of these reserved constituencies went to voting, the women voters in those constituencies have outstripped the men voters incrementally. I'm talking incrementally, much more than what it was, much more. So the bottom line again is that you are seeing these female voters, and since you must also remember that the final data of the Election Commission website was released a little later. So this trend became visible only after maybe 7 or 10 days. But the trend was clear. Yes, women are voting, and yes, the women are voting in this also reserved constituencies in larger numbers. A trend which has now getting more generalized from the fourth phase onwards.
Yashwant, the SBI research report also says that voters' structural break in 1996 happened, but as far as women voters are concerned, a structural break took place in 2014, the year Narendra Modi took power. Do you agree with that conclusion?
It started happening 2009 onwards. I mean, let's look at it from that way, because when you look into the impact of the Manrega and other schemes, which were aimed at the bottom of the pyramid, it has started happening 2009 onward. In that 5 years, it started reflecting more in terms of election numbers 2014 on. That's the fact. But the change had started, as he mentioned, that 1996 onward, the change had slowly started coming in, where the number of registration has started going up, but the turnout number in practical sense is a new phenomena post 2009. One thing which on that graphic I would like to point out about, however, it's first of all, it's very encouraging that more tribal women are coming out to vote, so their proportion in the absolute number is growing up. However, there is one point of concern, because too much of lopsided thing always tells us something which is alarming on the other side. Our numbers are also pointing out to the situation of the migrant voters, because big number of migrant workers actually come from the bottom of the pyramid, and an overwhelming number of those migrant workers happen to be the males. So even we do see stories of trains running full going back to the villages at the time of voting and all that kind of thing. But we also know that number of people who actually get to go back to villages to go at the time of voting is not even 10% of the migrant voters. So I think Election Commission at some point of time has to come out with some kind of a scheme for migrant voters who are working for a long time in new areas, but for big number of reasons, they don't want their name to be cut off from their villages and put in the new place. You know, we all know that Zameen Zaidad and everything, the patta and everything, the voter I card is an important document. So even though big number of migrant voters seem to be in different places at that point of time, they refuse to get their name registered in the new area, because that will automatically get their name unregistered from their villages. So this is one big chunk of voters, the migrant working population of India. Not everybody gets to go back to their home. 90% almost of that migrant migrant worker population tends to get disfranchised by virtue of not being registered in their new place. I hope that in the election reforms, this would be one of the things that Election Commission would look into and find a solution to how to go about it.
Absolutely, and there are already certain categories where some sort of relief is provided, and this can be added to that. We have a postal ballot system, and technology can ensure that some of the current ways of polling in India can become more technology intensive and therefore perhaps faster. But as we conclude this discussion, Yashwant, I will stay with you unless Dr. Ghosh, any point from the study that we may have missed that you want to bring up in closing comments before I go for one final comment to Yashwant?
I think, Siddharth, I will make 2 points. One is a very interesting observation made by Yashwant in terms of the migrant voters. I think one possible trend you always notice that elections to states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, from where the most of the migrant laborers come, the turnout actually tends to go up progressively as we move closer to the closing date. So, for example, today actually the turnout could be higher than what it was in third phase in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh if we go by the trend. So, basically, towards the end of the month of May, I think as school vacation starts and other vacation starts, there is a tendency that some of this migrant population can go and vote. And the fourth and the last point is that from the structural break was in 96 in terms of more electoral participation, and in 2014 was in terms of more women voters. In 2014, 19, 24, if we project the incremental number of voters, that comes to 8 crores per election. From 52 till 2014, this number was at 2 crores incremental voters if you take the average.
Yes.
So see, obviously there has been a jump in the voting turnout. The number was 13.7 crores in 2014 incremental voters, which came down to around 7 in 2019, and possibly this could lie anywhere between 4 to 4.5 crores in 2024. So obviously the electoral reform system has ensured a larger participation of the people in this democracy.
Absolutely, and that is most crucial for our elections. But Yashwant, away from some of these numbers, we are seeing voting that's happening currently. in many constituencies. How would you read the mood of the electorate at this point of time in this pretty long drawn election at the height of an Indian summer, Yashwant?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Mr. Ghosh for this wonderful analysis, because that's a part of the entire pie which has been missing largely, because everybody has been talking into numbers, percentage number. So there is another side of the story which I'm thankful to him, for pointing this one out. On the overall the turnout thing, Siddharth, I think we actually ended up over-analyzing the drop of the turnout in the first place. I think we just over-analyzed it. I mean, let's be very honest about it. And then, since then, the number has been consistently catching up. The fourth phase actually was higher than the last election, So, maybe for whatever reasons, we ended up, because there is a ghost of 2004, turnout analysis, which all the media people like you and me always go back to one, because once bitten, twice shy, So probably that drop in turnout, वो भूत बाहर आ गया एकदम से, अरे 2004 वाला कुछ तो नहीं हो रहा है, kind of thing. So, but having said that, what I realized, I did a massive data crunching at my end, and I realized that in 2004, the biggest drop in the turnout happened to be in metropolitan areas, which was like almost 18% turnout drop. And all those were strongholds of the BJP, which BJP lost, and we had an upset kind of thing, which nobody predicted and nobody thought it is going in that direction. This time the first phase drop was only 4%, and by the way, time the election will end up, I believe we will not see much of a difference between 19 and 24. That's what I believe now, number one. Number two, I did not see much of a difference as such, a pointed difference or drop of turnout like in urban versus rural, or Dalit versus non-Dalit seats, or tribal versus non-tribal seats. So that so-called drop was in each phase was a pretty secular trend, number one. Number two, the hypothesis which I finally came to, after looking into all the data, was wherever the contest was extremely good, the turnout was healthier. Wherever the contest was perceived as lopsided, Siddharth, the turnout dropped there. And reason of that marginal drop in the turnout in those seats was, those who are winning thought that we are already winning, what's the point of going out and vote? Those who are losing, they thought we are already losing, what's the point of going out and vote? And both these marginal groups found a perfect excuse in the heat wave. कि यार गर्मी बहुत है, छोड़ो कौन जाते हैं. So I think that had more to do wherever the perceived contest was lopsided, the turnout dropped. But within the state also, in the seats where the perceived contest was extremely good, the turnout actually went up. Look at the seats with the perceived contest in Rajasthan, Barmer, Jalore, those seats you can point out and you can say that, okay, see, it is better than state average because the contest is good. So I think more or less it's the voters who somehow felt either I am winning by very big margin or I am losing by big margin. Some section of that voter did not go out to vote, but it was, if it is perceived as a very neck and neck, very really good strong contest, you can actually tick out on the states that, okay, this is the state where the contest is gonna good, purely based on the turnout.
So therefore, continuity or change?
Well, I cannot remark on that, Siddharth, because I am fortunately or unfortunately privy to my exit poll data as such. So I will rather like to wait for some time more. It's we are on 20th. It's only about 10 more days, not more than that. But what I can say very responsibly right now is that I do not find any alarming factor as such purely on the basis of turnout. In fact, what I find very happily to learn from Mr. Ghosh's analysis that, rather than being alarmed, I believe the female turnout is only going to ensure that we are moving towards mandates which are more based on governance and delivery of governance, the real issues which matter the most, rather than the issues which are emotive and non-rational and will drive the people to vote out in a very real way.
Absolutely, Yashwant. That's a pretty good summation of some very interesting data. Viewers, you can try and catch more details of this once the actual numbers really come out. But Dr. Ghosh, thank you for making this effort, and to your team for putting together all of this data to try and get a different perspective on the role of Nari Shakti in the ongoing Lok Sabha polls. I'll be back with more. Until then, bye-bye.
Beyond the